Let's say that you're a GRC analyst within an organization. At some point in time, and on many occasions possibly, your GRC function may require of you to develop or help various departments with the developments of policies and procedures. Now, for this process to be effective, and the key word is effective, there are some critical things that you must take into consideration. There are also a number of questions to be asked in this process, and also seeking guidance from established best practices. Well, you could always grab a few templates and customize them accordingly. However, I believe it's good practice to at least take the time to understand the mechanics behind whatever it is that you are doing. Now, before we get into this, looking at developing effective policies and procedure, let's clarify the difference between a policy and a procedure. Now, as it relates to a policy is a high-level statement or set of principles that outline an organization's stance, intent, or direction on a particular subject or issue. Policies are designed to guide decision-making and establish the framework for actions within the organization, and they set the overall direction and expectations, but do not provide detailed instructions and how to implement those expectations. And no doubt you would have come across various policies, especially in cases when you are actually being employed, and you have to sign various policies and procedures accordingly. Now, a procedure, on the other hand, is a detailed step-by-step set of instructions or guidelines that outline how a specific or process should be carried out within an organization. And procedures are more operational and specific than policies, and they provide the necessary guidance for employees to perform their tasks consistently and efficiently, ensuring compliance with organizational policies and external regulations. Now, with that said, let's take a look at a policy and a procedure for the implementation of that particular policy. So what you're seeing on screen is a sample of a policy, and this is a information security and awareness and training policy. And if you notice, you recognize that the policy has a certain structure. For example, in this case, we have our policy statement, and it says that this information security awareness and training policy is established to ensure that all employees, contractors, and third parties understand and adhere to our organization's information security standards. It is imperative to protect our sensitive data and mitigate risks associated with unauthorized access, disclosure, or loss of information. So the structure is very important. So you have your policy statement, the purpose and scope, the responsibilities, the training program, the details in terms of the content, frequency, communication and awareness, reporting, compliance and enforcement, review and improvement, document repository. So the policy has a particular structure in of itself. So these are the fundamental elements that you definitely need to be aware of. I'll be getting back to those as we progress along. So this is now the procedure that is used in terms of those specific steps that are required to meet the requirements of this policy that has been established. And within the procedure, then you have, for example, it says that need assessments. And the objective is to identify the specific training needs and requirements for your organization, going back to the steps. So in this is more details as relates to procedures, giving instructions and steps that are required to meet the requirements of your policy. So with that understanding, then now that we have seen a sample of a policy and a procedure for that particular policy, let's look at the mechanics or considerations behind those two documents. that I need you to put into practice where applicable. That's the key thing. All of these things that I'll be sharing with you might not be applicable accordingly, but at least you'll be aware of a number of elements, number of best practices, number of considerations as it relates to implementing and developing various policies and procedures within your organization. So things to consider, questions to ask, best practices to apply in this process. So very importantly, very first thing that you want to do in this exercise is to understand your organization objectives. There's no way you can be developing policies generically based on, for example, grabbing a template and then customizing it to be dispersed within an organization without aligning it with the objectives of this organization. So you have to understand the organization objectives. What are the main reasons for that particular policy? So these are some questions that you need to be asking or thinking about. So what are the organization goals and objectives? How do policies and procedures support these objectives? What regulatory requirements or industry standards must be adhered to? Secondly, you want to identify the key stakeholders in terms of who are the persons, who are the entities that this policy will affect. So what are the key stakeholders involved in the policy development process? How will you involve them and gather their input in this process? Thirdly, conducting a risk assessment. What are the most critical risks the organization faces? How will policies and procedures mitigate these risks? And I have intentionally placed all the details on screen so that at least you're able to get a screenshot of this information as we go along. Fourthly, you want to think about legal and regulatory compliance. Going back to the point that not all of these considerations, best practices, or questions might be applicable. So you need to think about these within the context of your organization and the policy that you're developing. So legal and regulatory compliance, are there specific laws, regulations, or industry standards that your organization must adhere to? How will policies and procedures ensure compliance? Going back to your scope and purpose. And this is where you have to clearly define the scope and purpose of each policy and procedure. What specific areas do they cover and what objectives do they serve? The document in your policies, then procedures and guidelines. So for each policy, then you have to outline the specific procedures, guidelines, and responsibilities that need to be followed. Include step-by-step instructions where necessary. Documentation and version control. And this is where you want to maintain a comprehensive record of all policies and procedures, including version control, ensuring that employees can easily access the most current versions. Testing and validation. Consider conducting testing and validation of policies and procedures to ensure they are practical and effective. So that's a very important element as well. And oftentimes we see where policies or procedures are developed within organizations, and there are challenges on the part of various people within those organizations to actually execute these various policies, understand the policies in the first place, and then executing the policies accordingly based on the procedures. So that clarity needs to be there. So that is where we have the testing. So you have crisis management, have policies and procedures in place for crisis management, including incident responses and business continuity, privacy and data protection, cross-functional collaboration. This is also very important, where you involve relevant departments and teams in the policy development process to ensure alignment with business process. So this is where you want to seek input, even though you're the one that is in charge of the development of these policies within these organizations. Then we have documentation repository, implementing a secure and organized repository for storing policy documents, making them easily accessible. Going to your communication channels, this is where you want to establish clear channels for employees to seek clarification or report violations of policies. Going back to employee feedback, which I mentioned earlier. And this is where you encourage employees to provide feedback on policies and procedures and consider their suggestions for the improvement of these policies. Very importantly, continuous improvement. So policies and procedures should be dynamic and updatable. Continuously assess their effectiveness and make the necessary updates. So going back to our policies and procedures, then we recognize that this might at face value look very simple, straightforward, but there is a science, there's a mechanics, and these are some of the things, these are some of the questions that I've outlined previously that you need to be thinking about in terms of when you are developing the policies, the procedures, bearing in mind that you want these to be effective. That's the key word, effective, applicable, whereby all parties involved understand the objectives of these policies and the importance in terms of meeting organizational objectives and mitigating risk to the organization overall operations. So within these policies, you have your policy statement, and it breaks down into the purpose and scope. So you have your purpose, the scope, responsibilities, management, information security team, employees, training, then you have your content, how often this must be done, the delivery method, the documentation process, communication and awareness. Going back to your procedure, training and development, and the steps involved, define the training curriculum, including topics, and the list goes on. Training delivery, schedule and announcement, and the list goes on. So now that you have an understanding of these elements, then you're now in a better position to be able to help your organization to develop policies and procedures more effectively. And the fact is that this process can be quite involved. It can also be quite challenging. But the fact is that doing this on a regular basis will become more easier on your path. And I hope that you have found this information very helpful. And in addition to this information, you may also want to enhance your GRC skills by exploring a number of courses that I've actually developed on Udemy that are geared towards building your skill within the GRC and cybersecurity field. So let me quickly share some of those with you so that you can actually explore some of these to take your GRC and cybersecurity skills to the next level. So here we have a number of courses, particularly practical assessments for cybersecurity and GRC professionals, best practices for cybersecurity and GRC professionals, the ultimate cybersecurity professional. And this gives you an holistic approach to developing a cybersecurity program, pivoting into cybersecurity and GRC, IT auditing fundamentals, cybersecurity strategy development, executing, for example, practical compliance management for GRC professional. So I strongly recommend that you look at those as well. So I do hope that you found this very informative, and feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, and do not forget to share, subscribe, and like for greater reach.